This is the Rainbow Giggidy Box. It's my ultimate RGB PC build featuring an AMD Ryzen 5 3600 and a GTX 1660. All inside an NZXT H210i. Hey guys, Jonathan here with TechWizTime, where I help you save time and money when it comes to gaming and technology. In this video, we're doing something a little bit different, and we're going full-blown RGB, or as full-blown RGB as I can handle right now. So this box I've nicknamed the Rainbow Giggidy Box, or RGB for short. Now at the heart of this box is the AMD Ryzen 5 3600, and it's cooled by an all-in-one water cooler, or the NZXT Kraken X52. So it's a 240mm liquid cooler, and the block also features controllable RGB LEDs. Next up, we've got the Gigabyte X570i Aorus Pro Wi-Fi. Now this is a mini ITX board from the X570 range, and it also features onboard RGB underneath the motherboard, which is awesome. Next up comes the RAM, and we're using 16GB of 3200MHz RAM. It is the XPG Spectrix D60G RGB RAM. Now next up is something you don't see a lot of, but it's an M.2 NVMe drive that's RGB as well, and that's the XPG Spectrix S40G. So this particular one is 512GB, and it should be big enough to handle most things. So next up is the power supply, and I've chosen here to go with the Thermaltake Smart Pro RGB 650W power supply. And this one, believe it or not, also has RGB. All right, next on the ranks is the graphics card, and unfortunately this is the only one that I didn't get RGB on, and it's the GTX, or the Gigabyte GTX, sorry I should say, 1660 with 6GB of RAM. Now this isn't RTX or anything like that, but it is the 1660, and it will be more than capable of playing games. Now to house all these components, I've chosen to go for the NZXT H210i. Now this is the refreshed H range from NZXT, and this one also has a smart intelligent controller built into the actual case. And it also has a strip of RGB lights up underneath the front. Awesome! Now I couldn't stop there because this is the ultimate RGB build, so I've taken a few steps further. So in particular, what I'm doing here is I'm using the NZXT Hue RGB Underglow kit, or Hue 2 I should say. So this is two 200mm RGB strip lights, encased in their own little case. Now I'm going to stop the video here just for a second and just be talking to the Australian and New Zealand audience here. So you can skip ahead if you're not in Australia or New Zealand. I'll leave a little time mark down in the description. So while stocks last, in Australia and New Zealand, you can actually get a free Underglow kit when you purchase a new NZXT case. Now the models that are applicable for this promotion are the H210i, the H510i, and the H510i Elite. Now with those ones there, you'll get a 200mm underglow kit. With the H710i, you'll get the 300mm underglow kit for free. So this is definitely while stocks last, so make sure you check with your retailer to see whether or not you can get the free underglow kit with your new case. So now that little promo's out of the way, I'll keep going with the rest of the video. So next up, the stock fans inside the case were just your normal black fans. So I thought, hang on, I want to take this to the next RGB level, so I've switched that out for the Aer RGB 2 fans from NZXT. Now this is a little kit that comes with 220mm RGB fans and also the Hue 2 controller unit, which I haven't used in this case, but I will explain that a little bit later. And lastly, because this wouldn't be an ultimate RGB build without more RGB, I decided to go with the NZXT Hue 2 Lighting Kit. RGB Lighting Kit, I should say. Now this comes with the Hue 2 controller unit again, which I will explain why I haven't used in the video a little bit later, but it also comes with 4 strips of RGB LED lights. And because of space constraints, I've only used 2 in this mini ITX case. So to go over the RGB elements in this case again, we've got the NZXT Kraken X52 water block, that's RGB. Then you've also got the motherboard itself, the Gigabyte X570i, which has RGB underneath. Then we've also got the DDR4 RAM from XPG, the Spectrix D60G, and that's got the modules with the RGB light on top. Then there's the M.2 drive, which is the XPG Spectrix S40G, and that M2 NVMe drive has the RGB on top there as well, so you can see that from the front. Then you've also got the power supply, which is the Thermaltake Smart Pro RGB 650W power supply, which has the RGB lights in it as well. And you've got the fans, which is the NZXT fans, and the strip lighting, which is the strip lighting from the RGB lighting kit, And then you've also got the Underglow kit, which is underneath the case as well. How awesome is that? That's like RGB to the max. That's why I'm calling this the Rainbow Giggidy Box. Because who doesn't want to get giggity with it? So of course with any build there's always little hiccups that go along the way, and I thought I'd do a little pros and cons list with this build just to show you what went wrong and also what went right, I think. So let's start with the pros, because the pros are always the best. So when it comes to gaming, 1080p gaming with, say, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I was able to get 71 frames per second on the benchmark at the highest graphics settings, which was awesome. So most AAA titles, you're not going to have too many problems playing them at over 60 frames per second. Second pro is that this is called the Rainbow Giggidy Box. Come on, that's got to get points, right? Next is that the Gigabyte X570i motherboard, it comes with Wi-Fi 6, which is the latest revision of Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi 5, or they used to call it Wi-Fi, AC Wi-Fi, sorry. That was Wi-Fi 5, so Wi-Fi 6 is the AX, which is, yeah, a lot faster. Obviously, you'll need a router that supports that, but it is backwards compatible with all the other streams like NG, BA, AC. So no matter what Wi-Fi you've got, this one motherboard has it built in, which is awesome. And along with the Wi-Fi 6, you've also got Bluetooth 5, which means that you can just pair an Xbox controller with it or your headset or headphones. Less wires equals awesome. Now the other awesome thing with this is that the case, the NZXT H210i, also comes with the controller on the back to control your fans and your RGB lighting. So that's built into the case. Then when you pair that with the NZXT Cam software, you can control all those components, almost all those components. And this is where we come to the cons. So when it comes to the RGB lighting, most of it's controlled by the NZXT Cam software. However, because of the interfaces and so forth that the different manufacturers use, the XPG RAM, the XPG M.2 drive, and also the Gigabyte motherboard, they're all controlled by Gigabyte's RGB Fusion. And this is where the cons come into it, because having two pieces of software isn't too much of an issue in my mind, but what the issue is that when starting up your Windows system, if RGB Fusion starts up first, then it takes control and it won't let NZXT Cam control the NZXT RGB components. So that's a little bit of a downside, and that's nothing to do with NZXT or RGB Fusion, it's just the interaction there. If you can start NZXT Cam before RGB Fusion, which with a little bit of trickery in Windows, you can delay starting certain programs. So if you can do that, then that would definitely mean that you wouldn't have any issues with NZXT Cam software not recognizing or being able to communicate with the NZXT components. So that's a little bit of a con, but also if you've got a little bit of knowledge and know-how, then you can probably overcome that one. Now the next one is also on me, and that is I should have been looking at getting the NZXT Internal USB Hub. Now, the reason that I say that is because the Gigabyte X570i motherboard, it only has the one USB 2 header on board. Now, I would have loved to use the Hue 2 as well as the internal controller there to control the RGB lighting, so I could do a few tricky things. But because the motherboard only had one USB 2 header on it, I couldn't actually power the NZXT Hue 2 controller. This could have all been alleviated if I had have gotten the NZXT Internal USB Hub, which then has enough USB 2 headers on there to power a couple of these things. So part and parcel with that problem that I had, I could control the NZXT Internal RGB controller, but I couldn't do the same with the NZXT Kraken X52. And that's because there was a USB out to a USB 2 header to control the RGB lighting in the block. So what I did is I had to think about this a little bit. So I used the USB out from the NZXT block on the Kraken, and I actually fed that through the back. And it looks a little bit ugly, but it just pops out the side there from the back of the case and then plugs into a USB port. So it's not bad. It's not the best, but it works. Now, the next con has to do with the motherboard again, and this is because it doesn't have an onboard USB-C header internally. So one of the awesome things with the NZXT H210i is that it's got a USB 3 port on top as well as a USB-C port. That USB-C port, however, it has a specific cable that needs to plug into a specific port on the motherboard itself. And this motherboard doesn't have that port on board, unfortunately. So if you want to get full functionality out of the H210i case, then you might need to have a look at a different X570 ITX motherboard. And the last con that I've got has to do with the M.2 drive, and it's also got to do with the motherboard as well. So the motherboard has a shroud that you can put over the M.2 drive. But because it's RGB, I wanted to show off the RGB lights. But that comes with the downsides, which unfortunately is that you are gonna get a hot NVMe drive. Now, like we know, we want to keep things as cool as possible, and because there's no fan actually pointed at it like there is in the shroud, then things get a little bit hot, and that's an unfortunate thing. Like, touching it is gonna burn your fingers. Now, I do remember there was a video from Jay's 2 cents where he was talking about the RGB lighting in a Kingston SSD, and I think that was a little bit different. The temperatures were definitely going up whenever he had the RGB lighting on the SSD. I have tested it out by turning off the RGB lights with the Spectrix S40G M.2 drive, and it didn't really affect it too much. It only took it down by a couple of degrees. So I don't think the RGB lighting is the problem here. I think it's got more to do with the fact that it doesn't have the shroud on. It doesn't also have the fan pointed at it, which is in the shroud. And also that the chips underneath the M.2 drive are putting off a bit of heat. The GPU was fine, the CPU block was fine, there wasn't a lot of temperature coming from that, but the actual chips underneath the M.2 drive, I think that's where the issues were coming up. So if you're looking to go full RGB with your PC build, then potentially look at some sort of cooling for the M.2 drive and the motherboard itself, or looking at a standard M.2 drive, I should say. So this was a challenging build, like getting the ultimate RGB PC build set up. There were a lot of challenges there. The cable management was really well done in the back there. I love how NZXT have the channels there to actually put the cables into. Makes life so much easier. And even though there were cons to this, that a lot of them were fixable. So if you're experiencing any problems with your RGB build, then take note of the things like the NZXT Internal USB Hub. That would have helped me so much having that in there. I would have been able to do so much more with this build. But in saying that, the Rainbow Giggidy Box is awesome. I feel like I should be in a nightclub or something. Getting giggity with it. Getting giggity with it. How awkward is that? So if you would have done anything different with your RGB Ryzen build, then let me know down in the comments below. Let me know if there was anything that you think that, I could have done differently. If you enjoyed this content, then also make sure you subscribe to this channel because I've got heaps more videos coming soon. And with that said, make sure you hit the bell icon too, so that way you get notified when I release new videos. There's a couple of ways you can help support this channel to grow, and that is through Patreon. If you want to help share this video on social media platforms like Reddit especially, Facebook or Twitter, that's going to be a massive help to this channel as well. Oh yeah, don't forget to like this video, and also thanks for everyone's support over the years. It's been fantastic, and I can't wait for the next chapter in TechWizTime. So with that said, thanks for watching guys, and as always, imagine, learn, create.